In this Cakewalk by BandLab tutorial, we're going to cover the control bar. Located at the top of the screen in your projects is the control bar. Much of your time within Cakewalk by BandLab is spent recording and listening to your project as it develops. The control bar contains the most important tools and other pieces of information that you're going to need to record, edit, and even play back your project. The control bar consists of several modules that each contain various related controls. You can rearrange and show or even hide each individual module, which allows you to only show the functions that you need most often. By default, the control bar is docked at the top of Cakewalk by BandLab's screen, but can also be undocked or even docked at the bottom. To show or hide the control bar within your project, you can simply go up to the top left of the screen in the Views menu. At the very top, you'll see Control Bar. By unticking this, you'll actually hide the control bar within your project. If you'd like to bring it back or take it away, you could also press the C button on your keyboard. Now let's cover each individual module that's found within the control bar. Starting from left to right, we have the Export module, which allows you to export various different things within the mix, whether it be single tracks or the entire mix itself. And it also gives you the option to export it in different formats. You even have access to your presets from here. By clicking on the BandLab tab, you can actually upload it straight to BandLab's website, if you should so choose. Moving on to the next module on the right, we have the Tools module. The Tools module contains various tools that allow you to edit the contents in your projects. The current tool applies to whichever editing view has focus. You'll also notice that several buttons in the Tools module display a small triangle in the bottom right-hand corner. The triangle indicates that you can click and keep the mouse button pressed for a brief moment to access additional tools or options. You can also right-click the button and choose an option from the pop-up menu. So by long click and press, you'll see I have other options here. And by right-clicking, I also have options. Now let's talk about each one of the tools in succession. First off, let's talk about the Smart tool. The Smart tool is the default tool in Cakewalk by BandLab. The Smart tool is a multi-function tool that combines functions from several other tools. For audio clips, automation, and transients, the Smart tool is a combination of the Edit, Select, and Move tools. For MIDI notes, the Smart tool is a combination of the Edit, Select, Move, Draw, and Erase tools. The function is determined by where you click. For instance, if I was to hover at the top of this audio track, you'll notice that it immediately switches to the Move tool. If I move farther down on the audio track, it now switches itself to the Select tool, which would allow me to select a portion of the audio. By moving to the side of the audio file, I can now use the Edit tool, which allows me to edit the begin and end points of this particular audio file. And by moving up to the left or the right-hand corners, I can then set my fades, and by right-clicking whenever the triangle is present, I can even set what kind of curve I would like to have my fade. The Select tool simply lets you select data. You can select a time range or select entire clips, MIDI notes, envelope nodes, and transients. The Move tool lets you move selected data. You can move entire clips, partial clips, MIDI notes, envelope nodes, transient markers, and clip tempo map markers. The Edit tool lets you adjust data. You can slip edit clips, adjust note start and end times, adjust fades, raise, lower clip volume envelopes, and raise and lower note velocity and automation envelopes. This is one of the tools that actually has a separate menu. So let's cover what the separate menu contains. The Stretch option, formerly known as the Timing tool, lets you slip stretch audio clips, drag quantize MIDI notes, and stretch audio using transient markers. The Comping tool lets you isolate clips and take lanes when you have several different takes on a specific track. And lastly, the Split tool lets you split clips, cut clips, split MIDI notes, split clips at transients, and add envelope nodes. Moving on to the Freehand tool. The Freehand tool lets you draw MIDI notes and freehand automation envelopes. You can also create and promote transient markers. This is another tool that contains a drop-down menu. Let's briefly talk about what each one of these mean. The pattern tool lets you select MIDI data and paint it elsewhere in your projects as if it were a brush. The line tool lets you draw straight automation envelopes and paint MIDI notes. The sign pattern tool lets you edit automation envelopes by drawing sign shapes. The triangle pattern tool lets you edit automation envelopes by drawing triangle shapes. And the square pattern tool lets you edit automation envelopes by drawing square shapes. The saw pattern tool lets you edit automation envelopes by drawing triangle shapes. And the random pattern tool lets you animate automation envelopes by drawing random shapes. Lastly on this module is the erase tool. You'll also find that this has different options as well. With the erase tool selected, it lets you delete clips, partial clips, MIDI notes, automation envelope nodes, and transient markers. The mute tool lets you simply mute clips, mute partial clips, even mute MIDI notes, and disable transient markers. As a quick tip, you can quickly access the various tools from the Tools HUD by pressing the T button on your computer keyboard, wherever your mouse is located. Moving on to the next section of the control bar is the Snap module. Cakewalk by BandLab lets you define a snap grid that makes it easier to arrange clips and note events, select time ranges, and control envelope shape drawing. To use the snap grid, enable the Snap to Grid button found here. Now in the Snap module, set the grid resolution to an interval of musical time, such as a whole note, half note, or quarter note, a unit of absolute time, a number of frames, seconds, or even samples, an event, the start or end of a clip, a marker, or audio transients. The grid can use multiple resolutions at the same time, such as a whole note and audio transients, when the Snap to Grid button is enabled. If you move or place clips or markers, items will be snapped to the nearest point on the Snap grid. By default, Cakewalk by BandLab has the Smart Grid option enabled. Smart Grid allows you to hone in on a specific area, and by zooming in or out of a project by holding Alt and zooming in with your mouse, you'll notice that the Snap to Grid settings change accordingly. The tolerances are tighter as you move in, and they become looser as you move out. This can be very helpful when working with loop-based audio or for editing purposes. The number 3 here will allow you to snap to a triplet value, which then removes the Smart Grid tool and brings it back to the usual grid. By selecting the small dot here, you can even snap to a dotted value. There are additional Snap to Grid settings. To access the additional snap settings, go to Edit, Preferences, Customization, and Snap to Grid. The Snap section contains the following settings. Snap intensity. Specify the magnetic strength when snapping, which determines how quickly moved events are pulled towards the snap grid. By using the magnetic test here, you can then actually test the current snapped intensity setting. Snap to the nearest audio zero crossings. This will automatically snap edited audio clips to the nearest zero crossing of the waveform, the point at which there is no volume, to minimize glitches that can happen when waveforms are spliced together. And then lastly, there is the landmark section. This allows you to snap selected landmarks when the Events button is enabled in the control bar Snap module, which is located here. This will therefore allow you to snap to any marker, snap to the current now time. You can snap to the start or end of any clip, snap to transient markers within audio clips, snap to note events and MIDI clips, and even snap to automation envelope nodes. The next module found on the right-hand side is the Transport module. The Transport module lets you control the transport and transport-related functions, such as record, return to zero, rewind, stop, play, and fast forward. Moving from left to right, rewind will gradually let you rewind the project. Stop will stop the playback of the project. Play will start and stop the playback of the project. Pause will pause and also resume the playback of the project. And fast forward will gradually fast forward through the project. You'll notice that as in previous modules, the record control has a small triangle in the bottom right-hand corner, which means that it has more menu options. With a long click and press, I can actually access the various menus found within this. When the recording control is set to comping, previously recorded material on the track is not heard. When a recording is done, the newly recorded material is heard and all other takes are time muted for the duration of the new material. That new material is then stored within take lanes that can be found here. With the recording control set to overwrite, new material replaces or overwrites any existing material. This means that portions of existing clips may be wiped clean to make room for newly recorded material. While recording, you will not be able to hear the material from existing clips. With the sound on sound option selected within the recording control, the new material is merged with any existing material. This means that any existing clips on the track are left unchanged and all newly recorded material is stored in new clips. While recording, you will actually be able to hear the material from existing clips. This can be very helpful when trying to do guitar overdubs or trying to get solo takes just right. And lastly, we have the step record option. Step recording is a method of recording MIDI notes, one note or a chord at a time. It's a very easy and precise way to record, but can sound mechanical if used in the wrong situation. Now moving on to other features found within the transport module of the control bar, we have the RTZ or return to the start of the project button. This is your progress bar, which will show you where at in the project you currently are. And this is your go to the end of project button. The time display section shows useful information about the current project, including the now time, sample rate, and bit depth, tempo, and meter. Whatever time is currently on the time display is your current now time. This shows your current location in the project. By right-clicking on this section, you can set it to either be measured in measure beat ticks, hours, minutes, seconds, and frames, also known as SMPTE, milliseconds, or even to be displayed in samples. Also contained within this module is a dropout indicator, which appears whenever your project requires more resources than your CPU, main memory, and your disk can supply. Here we have the audio engine on/off or enable and disable audio engine. The audio engine button lights up if the audio engine stops running. To restart the audio engine, simply click the audio engine button. This button here is the reset or panic button for resetting MIDI and audio. This will allow you to reset any stuck MIDI notes. The reset button flashes if a MIDI note is stuck. The project sample rate and recording bit depth are displayed here. To the right of that, we have the current tempo at the now time. Double-click to change the current tempo settings. And located to the right of that, we have the current meter. This is the number of beats per measure and the note value of each beat at the current now time. Located at the far right-hand side of this module is the metronome on/off record, the metronome playback on/off, and metronome settings. By ticking each one of these, I can set the metronome's actions based off of how I have it selected. For instance, if I have it selected on playback, you're going to hear the metronome while playback is enabled. If I have it selected to record, it will only be during the recorded option. And by selecting the very bottom, I can actually have access to all of my metronome settings from here. Moving on now to the next portion of the control bar is the mix module. The mix module lets you configure mute, solo, arm for recording, effects bypass, and automation playback and recording settings. Click the mute button to mute or unmute all tracks. This button is lit if at least one track is muted. The solo button will solo or unsolo all tracks. The button is lit if at least one track is soloed. This button will allow you to arm or disarm all tracks for recording. This button is lit if at least one track is armed. And this button allows you to enable or disable input monitoring on all tracks. This button will allow you to bypass all effects globally. This button is the exclusive solo mode, which allows you to enable or disable exclusive solos. With exclusive solo mode, you can only solo one track and one bus at a time. This button allows you to enable or disable offset mode. In offset mode, you offset the current automation in a track using a perimeter control. This button is the global automation playback, which will enable or disable all automation playback in the project. This button allows you to enable or disable delay compensation on live tracks, thereby removing the latency during playback and recording of such tracks. Because it's a toggle, you can quickly turn it on to complete your tracking at low latency and turn it off when finished to hear the track compensated as normal. This button allows you to enable or disable dim solo mode. Dim solo is a mode in which non-soloed audio tracks or buses are still audible, but at a reduced level. This button is another global button which allows you to enable or disable plugin unsampling for plugins that already have unsampling enabled. And lastly, this button will globally disable all automation write enables for all armed parameters. And now moving on to the next module on the control bar, it is the loop module. The loop module lets you control loop settings. This button on the top left will allow you to turn on and to turn off playback looping, whereas this button on the bottom will allow you to set loop points. You can change the selection here, or you can physically drag those points to somewhere that makes sense. By highlighting a portion of audio, holding down the Shift button and pressing L, you can loop only that portion of audio. By pressing the L button again, you can disable the looping function. The next module found within the control bar to the right is the performance module. The performance module lets you monitor your computer's performance, including CPU, disk, and memory activity. By right-clicking the performance module, I can access various CPU meter options, such as audio processing, system performance, and overall app performance. When audio processing is selected, it measures Sonar's audience processing load, which is the time that it takes to process a buffer of full audio data as a percentage of the maximum time available to process that data and maintain uninterrupted playback. There is one CPU meter for each core on your computer, up to 32 cores. There is some tolerance, however, built into the meter, so it's possible that it will exceed 100% at times, which is more so during recording than playback. When the CPU meter is set to system performance, it displays the global system-wide load across all cores, as reported by the operating system, rather than by measuring Cakewalk by BandLab's audio processing load. As you can see, this is a 4-core computer and there are 4 different loads presented. By selecting Overall App Performance, it displays a single CPU meter for the entire Cakewalk by BandLab process CPU utilization across all cores. By default, it is set to System Performance. This disk activity indicator located here measures how much of the available time that Cakewalk by BandLab is using to perform input and output functions on your hard disk. The size of your setup's I/O buffer size determines how much time is allowed to perform disk operations and maintain uninterrupted playback. When Cakewalk by BandLab performs disk operations, the disk activity indicator changes color from yellow to red to indicate the time Sonar is taking to complete each cycle of disk input or output. A red icon indicates very high data activity. The memory usage or RAM meter shows the total RAM used by your computer, not just by Cakewalk by BandLab. On a side note, if you experience a dropout on your CPU or disk meters or reading high, there are steps that you can take to improve your audio performance. For more information, see the video listed above. The next module we're going to cover is the Select module. The Select module lets you control the selection from and through times within your project. This button specifies the now time as the time from which a selection extends, whereas this button specifies the now time as the time through which a selection extends. You can also click here to modify the select from times and through times. Anywhere within the project that you select will be mirrored on this Select module and can then be modified from here, or by clicking and dragging the select from and through times here. Clicking on a portion of audio will also be mirrored in the Select module as well. Moving on to the next module, we're now going to cover the Punch module. The Punch module works a lot like the Selection module, the main difference being that the selection that is made is the portion that will be recorded from. This button enables or toggles the punch recording on and off. And this button allows you to set the punch selection points. Much like the selection module, you can then modify the punch time in and out here. The next module that we'll be covering is the screen set module. A screen set is a snapshot of the current layout of various views and windows in a project, including which windows are open, their size, position, zoom level, and whether they're docked or floating. You can create up to 10 screen sets per project and freely switch between the screen sets at any time. Screen sets can be selected and edited from the screen set module in the control bar, or with number keys 1 through 0 on your computer keyboard. The screen set module in the control bar contains the following controls. The screen set menu, which allows you to select, revert, lock, rename, duplicate, and import screen sets. The name of the current screen set is shown in the menu. The menu contains the following commands. Select screen set 1 through 10. Revert current screen set. This allows you to revert the current screen set to its last saved state before the project was saved. Lock and unlock current screen set. This allows you to lock the current screen set to prevent any modifications. Rename current screen set. Duplicate current screen set 2. And lastly, import screen sets. This allows you to import screen sets from another open project. Any locked screen sets in the current project are not overwritten. As you can see here, by selecting different screen sets, I can adjust the way that my project looks internally. Having the ability to save these screen sets gives me complete control over my project's workflow. The next module that we'll cover is the ACT module. The ACT module, or the Active Controller Technology module, allows you to use a control surface or a MIDI controller to control the plug-in effect or soft synth that has focus. Cakewalk by BandLab communicates with control surfaces via special control surface plugins. The ACT module lets you configure ACT settings for a specific control surface plugin. The ACT module contains the following controls. This portion here will show the control surface name. This section here is the status display for the selected control surface plugin. This allows you to open the property page for the selected control surface plugin. This button is the ACT Learn, which enables or disables the ACT Learn mode. While in ACT Learn mode, it allows you to assign a specific effect or synth parameter to a specific hardware control on your control surface. And this is the ACT Lock. With ACT Lock enabled, it will lock or unlock the current ACT context, or the effect or synth that has focus. The next module that we'll be covering is the Markers module. The Markers module lets you navigate by markers and insert new markers. For instance, if I was to set my aim assist here and select that in my time ruler, I could then place a marker using this button. You can also right-click within the time ruler and insert a marker this way as well. Hovering over the marker until you see the small M above it will allow you to right-click on it and modify the marker. You can then change the name or adjust the time in which it was placed. Hovering over the marker until you see the small M will also allow you to click and drag the marker anywhere within the project on the time ruler. By right-clicking anywhere within this time ruler, I can also add another marker that way. Now that I have two markers laid out, I can then use my Markers module to jump back and forth between the various markers. The next module that we will cover is the Event Inspector module. The Event Inspector module lets you view and modify settings for selected clips and MIDI note events. If you select multiple notes, the Event Inspector module displays the note value if all selected note values are the same. If the note values are different, however, the Event Inspector does not display anything. The Event Inspector module contains the following controls. Time, which is the start time of the selected event or events. Duration, which is the duration of the selected event or events. The pitch, which is the pitch of the selected events, specified as note names CO through G10 or note numbers 0 through 127. The velocity, which is the value of the selected events, specified as a value between 0 to 127. You can also use a modifier to raise and lower the current velocity value. And the channel. This is the MIDI channel assigned to the selected events. This is specified as a value between 1 through 16. The next module to the right is the sync module. This module is mainly used for audio and video synchronization between Cakewalk by BandLab and the source material. The next module that we're going to cover is the custom module. The custom module lets you assign various Cakewalk commands and actions to buttons. You can assign up to 9 buttons depending on the module size. Small shows 3 buttons, medium shows 6 buttons, and large will show all 9 buttons. By right-clicking, if I was to select none, it would clear the button assignment. Menu items would allow me to assign any of Cakewalk by BandLab's main menu commands. And the command section would allow me to assign any of Cakewalk by BandLab's commands that is exposed as a key binding. Rename will let me do exactly what it says, rename the button. To assign a button, simply right-click a button, point to the menu items or commands, and then select the desired command. If you would like to clear the button assignment, simply right-click and select None. On the custom menu, I can assign commands to things that are either hard to find or are done rather frequently, such as save. By clicking save, it now saves the project. Save as will allow me to save the project as something that I would like to rename it. By selecting fit project, now the entire project is fit to the screen and easy to see. The keyboard will allow me to pull up the MIDI keyboard, and the preferences menu can even be accessed by one click, instead of searching through a wide variety of menu options. This can be very useful for speeding up workflow. The last module that we'll cover in this tutorial that's found within the control bar is the Mix Recall module. The Mix Recall module lets you save and recall multiple mixes for the current project. The Mix Recall module contains the following controls. The Mix Recall menu. The Mix Recall menu lets you select, save, load, rename, and delete mix scenes. The name of the current mix scene is shown in the menu, and the menu contains the following commands. The first is the list of saved mix scenes. You can select a mix scene to load its mix. If the current project contains more than 10 mix scenes, the list is shown in a Recall Scene submenu. Recall Previous Scene allows you to load the previous mix scene. This allows you to quickly compare 2 different mixes by toggling between the 2 most recent mix scenes. The name of the previous mix scene is shown in parentheses. Reset Mix. This resets all mix parameters to their default values and clears any automation envelopes. This command only applies to the settings that are selected in the Mix Recall Settings dialog box. Save Scene. This allows you to save the current mix to the selected mix scene. If no mix scene is selected, a new mix scene is created. Save as New Scene. This allows you to save the current mix to a new mix scene. Rename Scene allows you to rename the selected mix scene. This command only creates a friendly name for the current project. It does not rename the actual CWM file that is stored on your computer's hard disk, since the mix scene might also be used by other projects. Delete Scene. This allows you to delete the selected mix scene. This command only removes the project's reference to the mix scene and does not delete the underlying CWM file from your computer's hard disk, since the mix scene might also be used by other projects. Delete All Scenes. This deletes all listed mix scenes for the project. Just as before, this command only removes the project's reference to the mix scenes and yet again does not delete the underlying CWM files. Mix Recall Settings opens the Mix Recall Settings dialog box, which lets you specify the type of data that is applied when you load a mix, or use the Recall Previous Scene and Reset Mix commands. You can choose to restore all the mix data by default, or just a subset of the data. You can also specify if the operation should apply to all tracks and buses, or only to selected tracks or buses. By opening up the Mix Recall Settings menu option, you can see here that you can actually select or deselect various options for the Mix Recall itself. I hope that you found this in-depth tutorial on the control bar useful. If you have, make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with other individuals who might find it useful as well. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so that every time I upload a new Cakewalk by BandLab tutorial, you'll be the first to know.